Breaking news: illegal ergogenic aids is getting out of hand in sports today. Everyone is aware of the illegal and legal ergogenic aids utilized in sports. Some say that it is almost impossible to be successful in sports without them. Everyone was aware of the famous Lance Armstrong and his incredible legacy. Well, what is left of his legacy now? He is known for being an incredible cyclist and all of his accomplishments in the Tour de France until he was caught blood doping. Sounds a tad scary and extreme for an athlete of his caliber, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Some say you play hard, you pay hard. The first signs of blood doping were used in 1968 in the Olympic Games in Mexico City. It has been around ever since then and will remain to be an issue for years to come due to the fact that coaches and athletes' careers are dependent on the success of winning and not exactly how well they performed in the games, forcing athletes and coaches to partake in what you could call this extracurricular activity, which is not legal, of course, but it is due to the amount of money and fame coupled along with the winning or not winning that has forced these coaches and athletes to partake in this. Sports Illustrated interviewed Olympic athletes and asked a couple of questions. The first question was, if you were given a performance-enhancing substance and you would not be caught and win, would you take it? 98% of the athletes responded yes, of course. The more disturbing question was, though, if you were given a performance-enhancing substance and you would not be caught, win all competitions for 5 years, then die, would you still take it? More than 50% said yes. It is convincingly demonstrated that with blood doping, hemoglobin concentrations are increased, leading to a higher VO2 max or improved performance, which is why it is used mostly in endurance sports such as cycling, track, marathon runners, cross-country skiing. Some of the first accounts of blood manipulation was seen in 1984 by a cyclist of Francesco Moser, which cycled 51 kilometers in 1 hour and thereby shattering the previous record set by Eddie Merckx in 1972 by more than 1.5 kilometers. After this shattering record, it turned into an epidemic, and professionals were utilizing this aid everywhere because of the gigantic benefits of the VO2 max and performance. The reason an athlete may partake in illegal ergogenic aids such as blood doping is to achieve a higher VO2 max. 3 variables are considered, which are hemoglobin concentration and blood volume, max heart rate and max stroke volume, O2 affinity of the blood, and mitochondrial respiratory capacity. When all 3 of those are at its max, that is max O2 uptake and aerobic capacity, more widely known as VO2 max. Many people know hemoglobin is the blood's oxygen-carrying pigment, and erythropoietin, or better known as EPO, is the hormone that stimulates hemoglobin synthesis. So increasing number of RBCs and having a higher volume of hemoglobin results in more hemoglobin binding to oxygen and carrying it from the lungs to the muscles where it is utilized in aerobic respiration. So therefore, blood doping allows extra O2 to be transported to the working muscles, resulting in the ability to work for a longer period of time and increasing levels of performance as well as increasing VO2 max without having to use anaerobic energy systems. As the picture in front of you states, there are 2 methods in blood doping. The first method is transfusion, and the second method is injections. The first one is done prior to a race where blood is removed either from the athlete or someone else, and it is then frozen. During this, the old blood is combined with new blood, which can increase cell levels by over 50%. The second one is EPO, or otherwise known as erythropoietin, which is a hormone that stimulates bone marrow to produce more red blood cells, which can also increase it to over 50%. The last one is synthetic oxygen, which is still an injection but not as widely known as transfusions of blood or injections of EPO. So now that we have covered the basic and physiological background of blood doping, we can move on to testing hematocrit data and exercise performance for blood doping. So hematocrit data for males is about 40 to 49%, and females is 35 to 44, with usual an increase following menopause. And cutoff for most sports federations was set to 47 to 57% respectively. However, the graph in front of you shows hematocrit levels for pro cyclists during the Tour peak season, mid-season, and off-season. So normal ranges on this graph is between 40 and 45%. However, some of these during their peak season performances are reaching to 60% to above 60% in hematocrit percentage levels, which is usually about 10 to 12% over what most sports federations cut off percentages are. So, if this was the only research out there showing the effects of blood doping, assuming that no testing is being done for exercise performance or VO2 max, this graph alone states that during peak season percentages, there is clearly a great impact and benefit on the amount of oxygen being sent to the working muscles throughout the body. So, as you can see the graph in front of you, it shows a duration of approximately 30 days of EPO injections and the relationship between VO2 max, hematocrit levels, and red blood cell mass. There is a consistent rise in VO2 max over the 30 days, as well as 10 days post injections. But, of course, it's starting from 0% to a change of only 7% after the 30 days and 10 days of post injections. uh, that is when of all of them start to fall. So one can assume from this graph that yes, an increase in red blood cell mass and EPO injections can increase a person's VO2 max respectively, but can it have a huge impact on exercise performance? So now we can look at the second graph, which does not have any super recent studies. They range all the way from about 1991 to 2008 due to the fact that it was a review paper. And they broke them into trained cyclists and untrained cyclists. The brown lines represent trained, red is well trained, green is elite, and yellow is world class. They broke them into EPO injections and placebo groups. And most of the groups that had placebo did not have an effect on their VO2 max. But we are going to focus on one that is NINA 2005 EPO injections in the trained cyclist portion. So, of course, there were only 6 subjects, so that is also one thing that you can take into account, that there were not many people that they were testing. But all of them started as trained cyclists, and some even below the brown line. And after the injections, they all increased to either well trained and some even to world class. Now, that is a huge change in VO2 max, but the fact that they already were trained and knew how to be a cyclist has a huge impact on how they utilize their energy when they are training or pre and post test exercises. Untrained cyclists do not know how to properly cycle, I guess you could say. So, one thing that did not mention either was that there were no values on how much EPO injections they received, which I will later discuss how that can actually be more detrimental to the body than not having anything at all. Okay, so now we look at the last article that I chose, where it has a percent change in time to exhaustion and VO2 max during a donation effect and a reinfusion effect. So the donation effect occurred between 48 hours and 16 weeks, where they withdrew the blood from the athletes. After about 16 weeks, the VO2 max and time to exhaustion began to rise above 0, respectively. And then during the reinfusion effect, of course, there was a slight increase in VO2 max from about 0 to 10%. But after about 1 week or 2 to 4 weeks, there was no huge increase between VO2 max and almost a leveling out plateau in time to exhaustion. So, from this graph alone and the previous two, there shows that there isn't a huge percent change in VO2 max from reinfusion of frozen or transfusions of someone's own blood. Now, there are many ergogenic aids out there that aren't illegal. They actually can benefit someone's exercise performance and not get them disqualified from the sport. But to talk about the consequences that deeply outweigh the benefits of blood doping, come to these hematocrit tests that I show in front of you. So the first one is a normal test where it has a normal red blood cell count, white cells, and then plasma on top of that. Anemia, of course, is someone who has a huge decrease in red blood cells, which follows with fatigue usually. And then the next one is polycythemia, which can be said to be some type of cancer, but polycythemia is where there is a huge increase in red blood cell mass, which comes along with autoimmune diseases or EPO injections. And this can be detrimental on the heart's afterload, having to compensate for that huge increase of red blood cells. Now, as well as all those hematocrit tests, there are other things that come along with transfusions and blood manipulation, such as septicemia, transfer of infectious diseases, transfusion reactions to the needles, air embolisms, and the list goes on for the side effects that come along with blood doping. So, everyone knows that ergogenic aids can assist in exercise performance, whether it be mental or actually down to a cellular level. Lance Armstrong was convinced that blood doping was going to make his career elongate to an extent that he could make more news headlines. But there is no evidence from the research that I have found that VO2 max is deeply increased through blood doping. Yes, of course, there is an increase in exercise performance because there is more oxygen being transported to the muscles with the blood doping. But from the graphs previously talked about, this type of ergogenic aid just isn't worth being disqualified from the sport that you have grown up loving to perform in.